Hey, my name's Aiden. I, as some background, I do political consulting and specifically opposition research. And I'm spitballing this because I've never made a YouTube video before. And somebody sent me this video asking my opinion. I talked them through why I think this is like a really dumb video and why this guy, um, Wolves and Finance, I've never watched before, by the way. And this is the only video I've ever watched of him. Is this specific video about more fraud at Turning Point USA? And I watched this video, and as I watched this video with my friend, I walked through the processes that I would use to verify these things. And this has led me to the assumption that Wolves and Finance is either really, really bad at political commentary or, is just spitballing to either bash Arizona Attorney General Chris Mays or just, has some alternative motive. So in his video, Wolves and Finance makes three criticisms against Turning Point USA that seem shady to him. And then his fourth point is that Chris Mays should investigate them, which I'll get to later. But I'm going to debunk each of those 3 points that he makes, or at least show why they're not as questionable or concerning. I'm actually going to go a little bit out of order with these points, so I'll just say the 3 points in what order I'm going to go in. So Wolves and Finance's three shady points is first off that Turning Point USA and some of its subsidiaries pay this entity called 110 LLC that's owned by a guy named Jay Kaufman, who's a state legislature, and that this entity doesn't have a real address, and that's really shady. His second point is that America's Turning Point, a different entity, doesn't pay employees or pays ghost employees because, oh wow, look at the money go up. And his third point is that donors were usurping Charlie Kirk, and that Charlie Kirk was catching on to this like usurpation of donors that were going around Turning Point USA to fund America's Turning Point Incorporated. Um, Point one, the I-10 LLC address is really misleading and just blatantly false, and it doesn't take a lot of energy to figure that out, which is going to be the first thing I talk about. The second thing I'll talk about is the idea that donors are usurping Turning Point USA and going behind Charlie Kirk's back. And the second point is that, and then I'm going to go back to the second point about Turning Point USA paying ghost employees through America's Turning Point Incorporated, and why I'm not necessarily sure that's the case, but can't prove it, and neither can Wolves and Finance. So first off, Wolves and Finance makes the point that, and this is from the 990 that he showed. First off, to go back to his very first point, that he starts the video off with, which is just minor, is that, the IRS didn't post 990s for Charlie Kirk's three other entities affiliated with Turning Point USA. This is pretty common. In fact, I have looked and I double checked a couple entities that I know that are pretty well-renowned unions, and Turning Point USA hasn't, or not, sorry, the IRS hasn't posted their filings, but for example, ProPublica has. And that's just a matter of the IRS has about a 1 to 2 year backlog on actually posting 990s. And so there are still entities out there that don't even have their fiscal year 2023 990 posted to the IRS website. So it's totally within the realm of possibility that the IRS did not post 2024 Form 990s for some entities. That's relatively common. But that's, again, he didn't make any arguments about that. He just said that, and he said it's suspicious. I'm saying I don't really think so, aside from at least maybe the IRS's side, and they realized, oh, people are talking about this and people are requesting it, so we should put it online, which is oftentimes how they function, because there's such a big backlog that they'll only post things, or that they'll prioritize posting things that get requested a lot. But anyways, going back to his first point, so he says that this entity, 110 LLC, is at this really weird address, and it lists this 18521 East Queen Creek Road, Queen Creek, Arizona. Now, I checked at the FEC database, and I'm not going to show that just because I don't have it open right now. But you can go and see on both the Arizona campaign finance searches and the FEC campaign finance searches that this entity gets money from TPUSA, Moms for Liberty, and other Republican candidates or entities, and has been for the past like 3 to 5 years. I think it's since like early 2020s, maybe 2019. And so this entity gets money. It's like a real entity. It's a real organization. Jay Kaufman's background in general and his rise to fame in his personal business, because the Arizona legislature isn't a full-time legislature, not a full-time job. he runs media companies, which Wolves and Finance shows by going through Hoffman's this is Hoffman's financial disclosure statement, and so he's the president of these other marketing companies, including 110 LLC. And Wolves and Finance shows this address, and what's interesting is that he's totally missing the point. So something that I see a lot as somebody who works in opposition research is political consulting agencies will use PO boxes to hide their actual addresses, or because it's like just a guy, i.e. Jake Hoffman, running his own firm and he doesn't need an office because he can do it from home, but he doesn't want to list his personal address as his mailing address for his company. So a lot of the times when you're looking up these like media companies that are one-man shops or really small, the first thing you look for if you find an address at a strip mall is a location in that strip mall that has PO boxes. Now, the address that, again, Wolves and Finance shows is 18521 East Queen Creek Road, Suite 105-503 in Queen Creek, Arizona. And that's really important, at Suite 105-503, because the first thing I did, and it took me about 5 minutes, is I Google Mapped it. So we see 18521 East Queen Creek Road, and here's the strip mall. There's the safe where he walked by. In fact, here is the animal hospital he looked at. And as somebody who works in finance, I would assume he understands, like, for example, in Delaware, a bunch of companies are registered to PO boxes so people can't get their addresses and so they don't have to pay business taxes because they're registered in Delaware, even though that's not their real address. And that's something that, like, I feel anybody in finance or politics, at this level should understand. But anyways, the first thing I saw and looked for, oh, there's a UPS store. Not only is there a UPS store, but that UPS store's suite number is 105. So 105-503, the address used by Rally Forge and 110 LLC and Jake Hoffman in general, is not, the parking lot, which Wolves and Finance consistently repeats. Oh, he's giving millions of dollars to a parking lot. No, they're giving millions of dollars to a company that, by the way, has other clients in the Republican sphere and is run by somebody who has a long history of working in marketing and advertising and communications for Republicans, which he mentions, by the way, he worked for Turning Point USA, and he's operating out of a P.O. box in a UPS store, something that Wolves and Finance either omits or ignores or just didn't realize. But yeah, so it's not a no address or he's giving money to a parking lot. It's a business run out of registered to a PO box, which again is very, very common for political consulting firms that are like this. Also, Wolves and Finance made a comment about, how does this guy get his clients if he doesn't have a website? Well, I just say, and again, this is like politics in general is like, who do you know? And self-enrichment, which is normal. How does a former communications director for Turning Point USA / elected official who runs an advertising agency and marketing agency company get Turning Point USA as a client? Well, I don't know. Maybe he was the communications director, or maybe he knows other elected officials who knew Charlie Kirk. Either way, it makes a lot of sense, right? This dude has a personal connection to Charlie Kirk, has a long history of working in communication services and marketing, and is being paid, albeit a boatload of money, by TPUSA at a company that's registered to a legitimate address that is not a parking lot. It's a P.O. box. And so that's totally blatant. And obviously, Wolves and Finance must have seen this UPS store, must have seen that it was Unit 105 because he said he checked all the units and he walked through the whole thing and he has video footage of the animal hospital right next door, or I guess one door down, 2 doors down from the UPS store. So first point debunked. Not giving money to a parking lot. The second point that he makes, and it's really weird that he made this point because earlier in the video I'm pretty sure he basically answered his own question, or his own boogeyman. So he makes the point that America's Turning Point Inc. got $8.56 million in 2024. And he calls it like 150% increase, which is probably true. I didn't do the math. And he makes the argument, where did this money come from? And isn't it weird that these donors aren't just giving their money to Turning Point USA and that they're hiding from Charlie Kirk? Which on its face seems like, yeah, okay, maybe. Except earlier in the video, he noted that, hey, it's weird that Turning Point USA gave this entity like $8.5 million. So if you go to Turning Point USA's Form 990, which is this one, I'm looking at it, and I've gone just because the hard to navigate on the ProPublica website. I've gone and here we go on their expenses. Turning Point USA, which he says, by the way, doesn't have a weird fluctuation of revenue, donated or gave grants totaling $8,560,625 to America's Turning Point Incorporated, which is corroborated. And so you're thinking, okay, so there's the 8.56 million. To add to that, and again, this is on the on the 990 forms that he was looking at and that he is basing his arguments off of. So either he didn't review all of the 990s or he just excluded this from his video. So America's Turning Point reports all of their revenue sources. And lo and behold, they got $8,560,625 from related organizations, i.e. Turning Point USA. So the donors didn't go around Turning Point USA's back because all of this revenue increase came directly from Turning Point USA. In fact, they only got $265 from any other source. And that is the entirety of the $8.56 million they got. So to make the argument that isn't it weird that they got all this money, and isn't it weird that these donors must be going behind Turning Point USA's back and Charlie Kirk's back? No, because the money came directly from Turning Point USA and Turning Point USA's donors, and Turning Point USA, in fact, served as a conduit to get this money from Turning Point USA, which Charlie Kirk owns and runs, to America's Turning Point, its subsidiary organization, or related organizations. Which, by the way, that D section is for entities kind of like he mentioned, Wolf and Finance mentions there are 4 related entities to Turning Point USA. That's what, like, related organizations means. It's basically one of those other 3 entities giving money. So we have our answer to where that 150% spike came from. It came directly from Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. Now, his last point was they gave all their money to their employees, and they had 24 employees. And this is probably the only point that potentially has some merit about misusing money. But again, as somebody who works in politics and has like experienced and looked at this specific thing and looked for these specific things, like this type of setup is not uncommon, where you have a shell entity that's basically only purpose is to pay more money to executives of the original organization. But I'll also point out that all of this entity, so this is a 990 from America's Turning Point Inc. It's the same 990 as this one. It's just set to a different page because, again, these forms are hard to navigate online, and I wanted it just to be really easy. They reported spending $7.8 million on the Campus Victory Project, which is this big project, and it's pretty easy to Google. So all of their money, including presumably for their salaries, were paying people to work this project, to basically get speakers and host these big speaking events with other conservative speakers. And so, yeah, they're probably getting paid an egregious amount, but also, like, this is what they were doing. It's not, oh, what are these people doing? They're getting paid to do nothing. It's, here is the thing they've done. Here is where the money's being paid out. These are the people, these are what the people are doing. And they're hosting these events. And obviously, you know, this is a well-known thing. Basically, all the speakers that Turning Point USA hosts on college campuses come through Campus Victory Project. I think excluding potentially the TPUSA members themselves. So like when Charlie Kirk would go speak, it wouldn't necessarily be the Campus Victory Project. This is where they get like elected officials, and I believe elected officials is my understanding. So for example, as an example, I believe they had like one of Trump's cabinet secretary for urban and housing development. So i.e. like a presidential appointee come and speak. So the people that are getting paid a boatload of money are communicating with people as high as like probably weekly communication to President Trump. And so they're getting paid a boatload of money, but also like, one, it's politics, and I'm not saying it's not egregious because it is pretty egregious, but you know, it kind of makes sense. It's not as mysterious or as evil as I think Wolves and Finance paints it as. And finally, just as like a closing kicker to like this was a joke of a video and he's either really poorly researching it or not doing a great job, but I'm not even sure, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say this like as a statement of fact, but I'm not really sure that Turning Point Action Incorporated, or sorry, that Chris Mays has jurisdiction over this because Turning Point Action Incorporated, in fact, all four of um, Turning Point USA's entities are based in Indiana. In fact, they're all based in Indianapolis. So, in regards to financial crimes, I'm not even sure that Chris Mays would even have jurisdiction. So, overall, like two of the points that Wolf and Finance makes are just like blatantly false and not true. And then the third one has a logical, not justification, because it's not necessarily justifiable that these people get paid so much money. In fact, like it's super egregious and evil, and bad. It's in bad taste. But to somebody who works in politics professionally and does this type of research for a living, it makes a lot of sense, and it's not something that's super uncommon, especially when you get to organizations such as Turning Point USA that have tens of millions of dollars. So yeah, um, that's kind of my off the cuff rebuttal for Wolves and Finance's video Explosive, More Fraud at Turning Point USA. Again, I know he did a second precursor video to this one. I haven't watched that. I don't really care to watch that, or any of his other videos for that matter. Again, this was sent to me by a friend who asked me to kind of go through, and he's like, "Oh, I found this video really interesting, and I'm really interested in what your thoughts are." And within the first 30 seconds, I said, "Yeah, I think this guy's going to spew a lot of BS." And I kind of walked my friend through, and in fact, we did the research together, him and I, um, to go through and find all this. And he's like, "Oh, you should like call him out." So this is me calling out Wolves in Finance and just saying like, yeah, this video is kind of BS and is making a lot of conspiratorial theories that omit a lot of really important aspects and evidence. So yeah, that's it.